hostility by sinners against himself, so that you may not grow weary and lose your heart.
Today, based on this passage, I would like to share a few thoughts on the topic perseverance. Perseverance. And this passage that just read to us talked about persevering. Persevering obedience of faith in Christ, continually, without neglecting, without forgetting, with much firm, with much faith, with much belief, with much hope, continue to believe in God, having faith in God, and following God, or working working wholeheartedly. That's what we find. So the passage talks about persevering obedience of faith in Christ. Now, what is perseverance? Actually, according to the English dictionaries, there are a lot of explanations about perseverance or meanings, similar meanings. It is all about, perseverance is all about continual effort, continual determination, and continually standing firm in the faith and endurance, enduring always, steady persistence in spite of difficulties, problems, oppositions, or discouragement, obstacles. So that is all about perseverance. So this passage talks about continually following God with wholeheartedly, believing in God despite the obstacles, despite the oppositions, despite the discouragement, despite the difficulties that we face in our day-to-day life. That is all about perseverance. So this passage talks about that. And from verse 1 to 3, we see three things the author has mentioned very clearly. For the Christians, for the believers in Hebrew, to follow Indian life, the first thing that he mentioned is running the race with persistence. Running the race with persistence. He said that you lay aside, put aside, forget it. Whatever the struggles, whatever the problems, whatever the oppositions that you are facing in your life, you put aside, forget it, and focus on God. Focus on God. And also, you will have a lot of hostility of sin. The sin, you will face it. It's in your area. It's with you. And it will try to damage you. It will try to pull you down. When you are racing with God or toward God with Christ, it will try to distract you. But forget it. You try to forget it. Put aside and concentrate in Christ. And run the race. Live your life with persistence, with perseverance. Fixing your eyes on Jesus, who is now sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. That is the first thing he asked his readers to focus, to remember, and to practice running the race with persistence or perseverance. Second thing he wants his readers to know is Christ himself endured. Christ himself persevered the hostility of sin, so that you may not grow weary or lose heart. So here we find that Jesus, he was a pioneer to suffer, to face the difficulties, to face the oppositions. He is a pioneer. And he is a role model of perseverance for all the believers, for all the followers. Christ has already done that. He has already suffered. It's not that you are suffering now only. No, Christ is the pioneer. He already suffered. You have to follow that. You have to follow his footsteps, his example. He already set an example for you. You have to follow. You have to go through the difficulties and oppositions in your life. But you need to endure them. You need to overcome them. You should not be defeated by them. The hostility of sin, the activities of sin. That's what he mentioned in the second thing. And thirdly, he said that you will face hostility of sin and burdens, which is suffering, but it's nothing compared to his suffering. Whatever the sufferings, whatever the oppositions and difficulties, problems that you are facing from the world, from the people, from the Satan, compared to the suffering of Christ, it is nothing. That's what he said. That means the suffering of Christ was much, much more deeper, much, much more serious, much, much more bigger, much, much more higher than the suffering the Christians or the believers are suffering. He suffered to the point of shedding his blood. I don't think none of us has experienced that kind of suffering the way Jesus suffered in his lifetime. He was crucified. He shed his blood. His body was broken. It was so painful for him, agonisingly painful for him. And none of our sufferings can compare with the suffering of Jesus Christ. So these are the three things he mentioned very clearly. The first thing is you have to run the race with persistence. That means you have to live your life without giving your life to the temptations, to the difficulties, to the oppositions that you face. You have to look at Jesus and you have to move forward. Go forward. The second thing he reminded his readers is that Jesus himself endured. He is the pioneer. He gave his life for our salvation. He already suffered and you are just imitating him. You are just copying what he has done. And the writer urged the believers and the readers to follow that persistently. And the thirdly, he said that the suffering that Jesus suffered or endured is compared to our suffering. Our suffering compared to Jesus' suffering that he endured is nothing. His suffering is much more deeper, higher, and more serious. So these are the three things that we see. Now, Scott Peck, in his classic book, The Road Less Traveled, makes his declaration in his opening sentence. He said, life is difficult. Life is difficult. That means, as long as we live in this world, as long as we are alive, our life is not easy. And we will not be safe from the oppositions or from the difficulties or the problems in our life. That will be with us always. It will be with us always. It will never go away from us. So life is not a bed of roses, as we learning, as we listen in the songs also. So life is difficult. We have to face that, and we cannot avoid that. And he is saying that life can be peaceful, it can be joyful, and filled with a lot of blessings. At the same time, life is difficult. We have to go through the sufferings in our life, and we cannot avoid it. That's what he said. So exactly as the writer of this letter said, the sufferings and the oppositions, the problems, the difficulties will be with us always. The only thing that we have to do is put aside, put it away from us and focus on Jesus Christ with persistence. That's what we see. Now, so the persistence, perseverance, or endurance is very much a necessity in Christians' life, in our journey. Very, very important, because we clearly see that the sufferings or the endurance, the difficulties will not go away from you. It will be there always till you die. Therefore, perseverance or persistence is very, very important, especially for the Christians, for us to overcome all the temptations and the trials and the difficulties in our life. Here, when we talked about the sufferings, from the very beginning of Jesus' ministry until its end, Jesus Christ faced and persevered through oppositions, accusations, interrogations, schemes, plots, threats, and ultimately absolute rejection and death. That's how he suffered. He was betrayed by his own disciples Judas. His pain was not just physical. Can you imagine the sorrow he felt when one of his own trusted friends became the ultimate traitor? He faced that in his lifetime. And he was abandoned by his other disciples. Look at Matthew chapter 14 verse 50. That clearly says that all his disciples, when he was arrested, instead of rescuing him, standing for him, they fled. They fled. All the disciples fled. That's how Jesus suffered all by himself, all alone. And then he alone carried the burden of the sins of the world. He was falsely accused and rejected by Jewish leaders. The very people he was sent to save, the very community, the very group of people he was sent to save, spat on his face, blindfolded him, cursed him, and falsely accused him of blasphemy. Can you imagine the agony that he went through, that he faced? And he was also mocked and abused by Roman guards. The Roman guards, when they were guarding him, they mocked him and they abused him. Roman soldiers flogged Jesus with a whip, drove a crown of thorns into his skull, beat his head with sticks, and mockingly pretended to worship him. That's how he endured the suffering. And he was crucified between the two thieves. He was crucified between the two thieves. We cannot fathom the pain of crucifixion. Metal spikes were driven into Jesus' hands and feet. And finally, his body was pierced with a spear. And he tasted death for all. That means he died literally. So these are the things, or this is how Jesus has endured his suffering in his lifetime. So compared to our sufferings, compared to difficulties that we face, the problems that we face, our problem, our difficulty is nothing. And Jesus has laid the foundation. He is the pioneer. And God has granted grace to us to overcome all these burdens, difficulties, and the problems that we face, and run victoriously over the Satan, over the temptations. So this is how Jesus endured his suffering when he was on this earth, ministering on this earth. So Hebrews chapter 12 verse 1 to 3, we see the supreme example of Jesus Christ. And the writer exhorts the reader to find encouragement, to face reproach and persecution by deliberately filling their minds with thoughts of Jesus and his and his triumphant achievement. He wants his readers, whoever reads this letter, the writer wants them to remember that Jesus died. He suffered, but he has overcome that. He was victorious over all the accusations, over all the temptations, trials. He has overcome that. He wants them to learn that so that they can also take the lesson from there and they can concentrate in running with perseverance with perseverance. And secondly, the writer also wants them to recall what Jesus has endured for the joy of the heavenly reward which he now permanently enjoys as one who is enthroned at God's right hand. Not only He wants them to remember how Jesus endured His sufferings and overcome and victorious over them, but He also wants to remember that the joy that Jesus has received in His life, the heavenly reward that He received, now sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. Same way, He wants the writer wants his hearers or listeners or readers to concentrate the heavenly reward at the end of the day, at the end of their life, and also to be with God. He wants everybody to expect that reward, heavenly reward. Now, 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 21 very clearly says, Paul very clearly urged us to follow his steps, set an example. Jesus has called us to run a race. It's a faith race. It's a long distance race. The stadium or a race plot in which the Christian's race is this world. And the world is full of hostility of sins. A lot of accusations, a lot of temptations, a lot of problems, and a lot of difficulties. So we are running amidst of all these problems and amidst of all this hostility of sins. We are urged to pursue perseverance. We are called to perseverance, and persistence ultimately wins. It pays off, and it does. Despite all these tribulations or accusations, the problems and difficulties that we face and the temptations that we face, if we have perseverance, if we are dedicated, if we follow Jesus Christ wholeheartedly, we will be the winner. We will be the champion. That's what we learn. And the price of that is heavenly glory. The price of perseverance is nothing but heavenly glory. Now, one of the things all Olympians have is the quality of perseverance, or else they would not be in the Olympics. Now, the perseverance of training, the perseverance of discipline, the perseverance of practice, only these things will help them achieve the goal, and that is to win a medal in the Olympics. We all know, I think, I was just checking some of the YouTube about the sports, the gymnastics, how the Chinese people train the gymnasts, because they are very famous. And every Olympics, every tournament, they win medals, either gold or silver or bronze. I think the way they train the youngsters, I think just 3 or 4 years old, some of them, they are forcefully, they stretch their leg, they hand their body and all. Some of them are crying. Some of them are crying because of the pain. And when we talk about a sports person, how much they train, it's not a matter of 1 day or 1 week or 1 month. No, it takes years to participate in the Olympic. It takes years. The same way for us to achieve heavenly goal, heavenly prize, we have to our running is a long distance. To fight with the devils, hostility of sin, it's not just 1 day or 1 week. Every day we have to fight. It is only when we are persistent, then we will be able to conquer the temptations. Confucius says, the man who moves a mountain begins by carrying away small stones. Right? From there we learn about persistence. To remove a mountain, somebody has to, one by one, they have to carry the stones. How long will it take? It's not a matter of 1 week or 1 month. It will take a very, very long time, right? So, to be victorious, to live a victorious life, we need persistence. We need perseverance in our life. Abraham Lincoln also says, I'm a slow walker, but I never walk back. He never gave up. Perseverance is all about never giving up, but stressing on towards the front, towards the goal and moving on. That is all about perseverance. So, perseverance is very, very important for the children of God. With this only we will be able to overcome the temptations. We will be able to live faithfully before God. And President Calvin College, he said, nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Nothing. Talent will not take away the persistence. Genius will not. Education will not. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The slogan, praise on. The slogan, praise on, P-R-E-S-S, praise O-N, praise on, has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race. It is only when we have that perseverance, persistence, stressing forward, never giving up, never looking back. Only that will help us solve the problems, overcome the temptations, and reach the destination. So, from this short message, let us all learn that as a believer and as a children of God, we need perseverance. Persistence is very, very important. And our education, and our money, and our beauty, our looks, our richness will not give that help. Will not help us solve the solve the problems in our life. Only perseverance, persistence will help us. May God bless us all.